It was raining the day they buried my sister, and the world seemed to bleed for her. The gray sky spilling cold tears that slid down the black umbrellas like mourning veils. The scent of wet roses and earth thick in the air, as if even the ground knew it was swallowing something too beautiful, too fragile, too damned to rest in peace. I stood at the edge of the cemetery, half hidden behind the stone angel that watched over the dead, its marble wings slick with rain, my black coat clinging to me like a second skin. I had told myself I wouldn't come, that I didn't owe her this, that she had chosen her path when she left me behind 6 years ago without a word. But when I saw her name printed in the obituary section, Isabella Moretti, fiancée to Dante Russo, something in me cracked open like a wound that never healed right. I hadn't known she was alive, not really. The girl I once shared a heartbeat with, the one who whispered secrets under blankets and dreamt of escaping our father's wrath, had vanished, leaving only a silence I learned to live with. Until now. The coffin was sleek and expensive, pure white against the mud and rain. A cruel contrast that made it look more like a sacrificial altar than a resting place. The mourners surrounded it in a tight semicircle, men in dark suits, women with trembling hands, bodyguards watching the tree line like soldiers on alert. And at the center of it all stood him, Dante Russo. Even from a distance, he didn't look like a man who belonged to this world. He was carved from shadow and danger, the kind of man who didn't need to speak to command obedience, his presence enough to shift the air itself. Tall, broad-shouldered, immaculately dressed in black, with a face that might have belonged to a saint if not for the darkness behind his eyes. He didn't cry. Not once. Not even when they lowered her into the ground. He just stood there, expression carved in stone, his jaw tight, his hands gloved, his gaze locked on the coffin as if he could will her back with the sheer force of his control. I felt something cold move through me when I looked at him. Something like hatred, but not pure enough to be righteous. It was envy, maybe. Curiosity. Or something far more dangerous. Because I could see it in his stillness. The way grief didn't soften him. It sharpened him. Whatever he felt for her wasn't love. It was ownership. And that was when I knew, without needing anyone to tell me, that my sister's death wasn't an accident. The priest's words blurred together, a droning hum beneath the rain and wind. I barely heard the prayers. My eyes stayed on Dante Russo, the infamous head of the Russo crime family, a man whose name made entire neighborhoods go quiet. My sister had been engaged to him. My sister who used to cry over stray kittens and read poetry in the bathtub. My sister who once said she wanted nothing to do with men who used fear as currency. So why him? The question burned through, my chest like a slow flame, because there was no world in which Isabella should have been anywhere near a man like that, and no world where a man like Dante let go of what belonged to him. When the funeral ended, the crowd began to scatter. But Dante didn't move. He just stood there, the rain dripping down the sharp lines of his face, unmoving, untouchable. People glanced at him but didn't approach. Even the priest hesitated before stepping away. It was as if the entire cemetery had decided he was something to be feared, not comforted. And maybe they were right. I should have left then. I should have turned away, gone back to my car, driven to the hotel and forgotten everything I saw. But my legs refused to move, and when he finally lifted his head, his eyes, dark, piercing, inhumanly calm, found me. The world stopped. For a long, unbearable moment, Dante Russo stared straight at me, and I saw it happen. The flicker of disbelief, the tightening of his jaw, the subtle way his body shifted forward like a predator scenting something familiar. I didn't move. Couldn't. My breath caught in my throat, my heart pounding like a trapped thing inside my chest. Because in that instant, I knew exactly what he saw. He saw her. He saw my sister. And for the first time since the day she left, I realized just how dangerous it was to look like Isabella Moretti. His expression changed, just slightly. But it was enough. A flicker of confusion, a flash of memory, then a sharp, calculating coldness that sent a shiver down my spine. He didn't speak. He didn't call out. But his eyes didn't leave mine until one of his men whispered something to him, pulling him back toward the line of black cars waiting along the cemetery road. Even then, as he walked away, I could feel it. The weight of his attention. Heavy and electric. Like a hand closing slowly around my throat. I stayed until the last car disappeared behind the gates. Only then did I approach the grave. The flowers had already begun to sag beneath the rain. Her name, freshly carved into the headstone, looked wrong, like it belonged to a stranger. Isabella Moretti, beloved fiancée, daughter, sister. My fingers brushed over the word sister, tracing the grooves in the marble. The lie tasted bitter in my mouth. Beloved? No. We hadn't spoken in years, and now there was no chance to fix it. But standing there, soaked and shivering, I felt something else. Something old and familiar stirring in my chest. It wasn't grief. It was fury. Because whoever she had become, whatever world she had stepped into, she had done it alone. And now she was gone. And I wanted to know why. As I turned to leave, a man in a black coat stepped out from behind a tree. I recognized him immediately from the news. Dante's second-in-command, Luca DeSantis. His eyes were sharp, his posture tense, his hand resting casually on the gun beneath his jacket. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his tone quiet but loaded. I swallowed hard. "I'm family," I said, though the words felt strange, almost foreign. He studied me for a long moment, his gaze flicking over my face with a kind of wary disbelief. "Family, huh?" he murmured. "Funny. The boss didn't mention you. He didn't know about me." That caught his attention. He tilted his head slightly. "And who exactly are you?" For a heartbeat, I almost told him the truth. Almost said, "I'm Elena. I'm the sister she never told you about. I'm the woman you buried twice today without realizing it." But something stopped me. Instinct, maybe. Or the lingering sense that I'd already stepped into something I couldn't control. Instead, I forced a small, tight smile. "No one important." He gave a slow, skeptical nod. "If that's true, you'll want to stay that way." Then he turned and walked off, leaving me standing alone with the rain and the dead. I watched him disappear down the path, and when I finally looked back at the grave, I realized my hands were shaking. Not from fear, but from something darker. Because I could still feel Dante Russo's eyes on me, even though he was gone. And somehow I knew. He wouldn't let this go. He'd seen her ghost at her own funeral, and men like him didn't stop until they caught what haunted them. And if he came looking for her, he'd find me instead. I told myself I would only stay the night, that I would leave in the morning, drive until the city disappeared behind me, and the weight of my sister's death became just another scar I could pretend not to touch. But grief is a strange creature. It lingers like smoke. It clings to your hair and your lungs, and even when you wash yourself clean, it leaves its scent somewhere deep beneath your skin, whispering that you are not done. Not yet. And so instead of driving away, I found myself standing in front of the apartment building where Isabella had lived her last days, staring up at the flickering light in the stairwell window, wondering what secrets those walls had kept for her, and what ghosts they might still be sheltering. The doorman recognized her name before I even finished saying it, and for a brief, painful second I saw a flicker of pity cross his face. That quiet, hollow kind of pity reserved for tragedies people don't want to talk about, but can't quite forget. And when I told him I was her cousin, my voice steady though my heart thudded like a warning drum, he simply nodded and handed me a small key, saying Mr. Russo had arranged for someone to collect her things in the coming days. but that I was free to take what I needed before the men came. The elevator was old and slow, the kind that groaned between floors as if the metal itself resented the weight of human sorrow. And when the doors finally opened, I stepped into a hallway that smelled faintly of lilies and cigarette smoke, a combination that felt wrong, too delicate for a woman like my sister, who had once loved wildflowers and sunlight and cheap perfume that smelled like peaches. Her door was easy to find. The apartment number gleamed faintly under the soft yellow light, and when I pushed the key into the lock, I hesitated for just a second, because part of me still believed, foolishly, irrationally, that she might be on the other side, barefoot and alive, scolding me for coming unannounced, laughing that soft, low laugh that used to fill our bedroom when we were girls and the world was still kind. But when the door creaked open, there was only silence. The air was stale, heavy with the scent of flowers long dead. The first thing I saw was a framed photograph on the entry table. Isabella smiling, her head tilted, her hand on Dante's chest. The picture was beautiful in a way that hurt to look at. She looked happy, or at least like she wanted to appear happy. But there was something off about her eyes, something tight around her smile, as if she was performing a part and forgetting the lines as she went. I walked slowly through the apartment, letting my fingers trail across the furniture, the bookshelves, the silk curtains that whispered softly when I brushed past. Everything was immaculate, almost staged, and it struck me that this didn't look like my sister's space at all. It looked like someone else's idea of her, someone trying to capture perfection and missing the point entirely. In the bedroom, I found a jewelry box on the dresser. Inside, instead of trinkets or rings, there were small folded notes, dozens of them, some with smudged ink, as if they had been written in haste or fear. I picked one at random and unfolded it carefully. He doesn't trust me anymore. I can see it in his eyes. I think he knows I lied. The handwriting was hers. I read it again and again, the words sinking into me like ice. Lied about what? Lied to whom? In the next note, her fear was sharper. If anything happens to me, tell Elena I'm sorry. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My name. She had written my name. My knees went weak, and I had to steady myself against the dresser. She had thought about me. She had known something was coming. And yet she hadn't called. I pressed the paper against my lips and closed my eyes, and for a long moment the room seemed to tilt, and I could almost feel her beside me, the way she used to, the way she'd whisper my name in the dark when she had nightmares and reach for my hand across the bed. But the feeling slipped away as quickly as it came, leaving only cold air and silence. That was when I heard it. The unmistakable sound of footsteps in the hallway outside. Slow, heavy, purposeful. Every muscle in my body went still. The footsteps stopped outside the door. A pause. Then a knock. Soft, controlled. The kind that wasn't a request, but a statement. I didn't have to open it to know who it was. I knew that knock already. When I turned the handle and opened the door, Dante Russo stood there, his black coat glistening with rain, his eyes darker than I remembered from the cemetery. He didn't look surprised to see me, not exactly. But there was something in his gaze that told me he had been thinking about this, about me, since the moment he saw my face by the grave. Elena Moretti, he said quietly, the name rolling from his tongue like a test, though I hadn't told him yet. For a second I wanted to lie, to tell him I was just a cousin, just passing through. But the way he said my name, slow, deliberate, heavy, made it clear that lies wouldn't survive long in his presence. You knew, I said instead, because it wasn't a question, it was an accusation. His jaw tightened. Not until today. He stepped inside without waiting for permission, and suddenly the room felt smaller, the air heavier, as if it had to make room for him. He didn't look around, didn't need to. His gaze stayed on me the way a hawk watches something that moves but hasn't decided whether to flee or fight. "You look like her," he murmured, almost to himself. But not exactly. She was softer. I flinched, because even grief could sound like cruelty when it came from a man like him. Maybe she had reason to be. That earned me the faintest curve of a smile. Not warmth, but acknowledgement. Maybe she did. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The rain against the window filled the silence. Then his eyes dropped to the papers in my hand. "You shouldn't be here," he said. "Why?" "Because there are things in this apartment you don't want to find." "I think I already have," I whispered, holding up one of the notes. She was afraid, Dante. Of someone. Of something. His expression didn't change, but a muscle in his jaw twitched. "Then you understand why I don't want you here." I should have listened. I should have walked out then and never looked back. But there was something about the way he said it. Low, steady, like he was trying to protect me, or maybe himself, that made me stand my ground instead. "She wrote my name," I said softly. "She wanted me to know something." He looked at me then, really looked, and for a brief, disorienting moment I saw it. The pain beneath the armor, the flicker of something raw and human buried under all that control. Then it was gone. "Go home, Elena," he said. "This isn't your world." "No," I said, meeting his gaze. "It was hers. That makes it mine now." For the first time, his composure slipped. His eyes darkened, his lips parted slightly, and the air between us thickened with something dangerous. Not just anger, but recognition. Like he was seeing a reflection he couldn't quite destroy. He took a step closer. So close I could feel the heat radiating off him, the faint scent of smoke and rain clinging to his coat. "If you stay," he said quietly, "you'll regret it." "Maybe," I whispered, but not as much as leaving. For a long time, neither of us moved. His hand lifted, almost as if he wanted to touch my face, to prove to himself that I was real. But then he stopped, his fingers curling back into a fist. When he finally turned to leave, he paused in the doorway and looked over his shoulder. "She had secrets," he said, "and if you start digging for them, you'll end up in the same grave." Then he was gone. I stood there long after the door clicked shut, the silence ringing in my ears, my heart still pounding with a rhythm that wasn't entirely my own. And as I looked around the apartment, at the notes, at the photographs, at the faint trace of my sister's perfume still clinging to the air, I knew he was right. But I also knew one thing he didn't. I wasn't digging for answers. I was digging for the truth. And if Dante Russo was part of it, then so be it. Because now that he'd seen me, he wouldn't be able to forget me. And neither of us had any idea which one of us would survive that. The next morning arrived not with light, but with the thick, suffocating gray of a city that had forgotten what warmth felt like. The kind of morning where the air itself felt heavy, as if mourning something unseen. And as I stood by the apartment window, watching the fog coil around the rooftops, I realized I hadn't slept at all, that my body had lain restless while my mind replayed the sound of his voice, the warning in his words, the quiet weight of his presence as if he'd left it here deliberately. A ghost inhabiting every inch of the space my sister once called home. The apartment felt different now, colder, emptier, and yet alive in a way that disturbed me, as if the walls themselves were whispering secrets I wasn't meant to hear. And perhaps it was exhaustion or grief or something far more dangerous. But when I caught my reflection in the mirror, for one dizzying instant, I saw her. Isabella, my twin, my other half, my vanished self. Her expression in the glass was unreadable, serene, distant, hauntingly calm, and for that fleeting moment I wondered if I was slowly becoming her, or if she had never truly left. if her shadow had merely stepped aside so that I could step into the life she had left unfinished. By noon, I had convinced myself I would leave. But when I opened the door, I nearly walked straight into a man waiting in the hallway. Not Dante, but one of his men. His presence unmistakable. His suit too sharp. His demeanor too composed to be anything but his. He introduced himself as Marco, though I doubted that was his real name, and informed me that Mr. Russo had requested, not invited, but requested, that I join him for lunch at his estate to discuss my sister's affairs. The phrasing was polite, but the tone beneath it wasn't optional. As the car drove through the winding streets and out of the city, the buildings gave way to trees, and soon I found myself staring through the rain-speckled window at the looming silhouette of a mansion that seemed less like a home and more like a fortress, all black stone and wrought-iron gates and windows that looked like the eyes of something ancient and watchful. The guards at the entrance didn't just glance at me. They studied me, their gazes flickering with something close to disbelief before they stepped aside, and I couldn't decide if that made me feel powerful or trapped. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of leather and cedar and faint cigar smoke, a masculine atmosphere that seemed to press in from every direction. And when I followed Marco through the long marble corridor lined with paintings of saints and sinners, I thought how fitting it was that Dante Russo lived in a house filled with both, perhaps because he saw himself in each. He was waiting for me in a room that wasn't quite a dining room, not quite an office, a strange hybrid space that smelled faintly of bourbon and rain, with tall windows that overlooked a garden of roses so black they almost looked burned. He was seated at the head of a long wooden table, his jacket off, his shirt sleeves rolled to his elbows, revealing forearms marked with faint scars that looked too deliberate to be accidents. He didn't stand when I entered. He simply looked at me, the way a man might study a riddle he both resented and needed to solve. "I didn't think you'd come," he said, his voice low, controlled, but with that undercurrent again, that quiet, dangerous heat that felt less like anger and more like something older, darker, and far more intimate. "I didn't think I had a choice," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "No one ever really does." There was a pause, long, tense, suffused with the unspoken. Then he gestured toward the chair across from him. "Sit. Eat something." I sat, not because I wanted to, but because I was suddenly aware that every move I made was being watched, measured, catalogued. The food in front of me was elegant, untouched, as if it had been prepared hours ago and simply waited for this moment. He poured 2 glasses of wine, though his remained untouched. "You're staying in her apartment," he said, his eyes never leaving mine. "Yes." "Why?" "Because it's the only place she left behind," I said. "Because I need to understand who she was when she died." He leaned back slightly, his gaze hardening. "She was my fiancée. That's who she was." Something in the way he said it, possessive, almost reverent, made my pulse quicken, not from fear but from some unnameable emotion that tangled itself between anger and fascination. "And what were you to her?" I asked quietly. He tilted his head, studying me. "What are you implying?" "I'm not implying anything. I'm asking." For a moment he said nothing, and then he leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table, his voice lowering to something intimate and unsettling. "Isabella was a woman who lived 2 lives," he said. "The one she showed the world, and the one she showed me. But I don't think she ever showed anyone her truth. Not even me." The words struck me like a confession, though I wasn't sure whose guilt they belonged to. I wanted to ask what he meant, but his eyes on me silenced the question. They were dark and intent, searching, as if he was trying to peel back my skin and see what version of her lived underneath. "You look like her," he murmured again, almost to himself. But your eyes, they're different. She always looked like she was running from something. You look like you're about to run toward it. His observations sank into me, sharp and precise, and I didn't know whether to feel exposed or understood. Maybe I am, I said softly. Something flickered in his expression. Approval, maybe, or curiosity. He took a slow sip of his wine, his gaze never leaving mine. You want to know how she died? Yes. Then stay close to me, he said, so calmly it took me a moment to realize it wasn't an offer, it was a command. I felt my breath catch, because part of me knew that agreeing meant stepping into a world I couldn't step back from. A world of shadows and whispered violence and truths too costly to survive. But there was another part of me. The reckless part. The part that refused to let her memory rot in silence. That wanted to see how deep this went. How far he would go to protect a secret. And if I say no? I asked. His lips curved, slow and deliberate. Then you'll keep digging alone, and sooner or later someone will bury you next to her. He rose from his chair then, walking toward the window, his back to me, his silhouette framed by the pale light of the storm outside. You shouldn't have come back, he said quietly. But since you did, you might as well see what she left behind. When he turned, his eyes were different, softer, almost mournful, and he held out a small black box. This was hers. She kept it locked in my study. I never opened it. I took it from him, my fingers brushing his. The contact was brief but electric, the kind of accidental intimacy that lingers longer than it should. I opened the box carefully. Inside was a small engagement ring. Simple, elegant, the diamond catching the faint light. And beneath it, folded neatly, a single photograph. The photo was of my sister, smiling. But she wasn't alone. There was another man beside her. Not Dante. And written on the back, in Isabella's handwriting, were 3 words that made my blood run cold. He's watching me. I looked up at Dante, my voice trembling despite my effort to steady it. Who is this? He stared at the photograph for a long time, then looked back at me, his expression unreadable. That, he said quietly, is the question that got her killed. And before I could speak again, he added almost to himself, and now it might get you killed too. I told myself I wouldn't follow him back to that house, that I would leave the photograph and the box on the table and walk out of his life before I became another secret swallowed by his silence. But curiosity, like grief, is a hunger that refuses to starve. And the more he warned me to stay away, the more I felt myself drawn toward him, as if some dark gravitational pull bound us together, a thread stitched from the same shadow my sister died inside. And so when he said, "If you want answers, you'll come with me," I didn't ask where we were going. I simply nodded, already knowing that whatever waited on the other side of his world would change me. The drive to his mansion took place in silence, the kind of silence that isn't empty but heavy with thought, with awareness, with something unspoken thrumming just beneath the surface, and though the driver kept his eyes fixed ahead, I could feel the weight of Dante's gaze on me from the seat beside mine, steady and unflinching, as if he was still deciding whether I was real or some cruel apparition sent to torment him for sins unspoken. The city melted away into the dark sprawl of his estate, a labyrinth of iron gates and stone walls and lights that flickered like watchful eyes. And when the car stopped, the sound of the rain against the roof seemed louder, sharper, like a warning I was too far gone to heed. When the door opened, I stepped out into a garden that felt more like a graveyard. Roses black as ink blooming in precise rows, their scent thick and metallic, the air tasting faintly of smoke and storm. The house loomed above us, its windows gleaming like mirrors to another realm, and for a moment, standing there in the cold wind, I thought of Isabella walking these same paths, her laughter echoing in halls now haunted by her absence, her footsteps erased by the same man who now waited beside me, silent and watchful, a ghost shepherding me into another ghost's home. Inside, the mansion was cathedral-like, vast ceilings, marble floors that gleamed like wet stone, chandeliers suspended like frozen constellations, their crystal lights spilling across portraits of men whose eyes seemed to follow you no matter where you stood. The walls held stories, I could feel it, whispered histories of power and blood and betrayal. And though everything smelled of luxury, there was something rotten underneath, like perfume masking decay. "Welcome to my home," Dante said finally, his voice low, steady, a statement rather than a courtesy. And I turned to face him, realizing that this was less a welcome than an initiation. "It's beautiful," I said, though the word felt wrong in my mouth. Because beauty here wasn't gentle. It was sharpened, honed, a weapon used to distract from the danger that pulsed just beneath the surface. He regarded me with that same unreadable expression, then nodded toward the grand staircase that curved upward like the spine of some sleeping beast. "You'll stay here, for now." I frowned. "You mean live here?" "I mean until I decide it's safe for you to leave." "And who decides what's safe?" He didn't answer, just started walking, expecting me to follow. And I did, even though every instinct in me whispered that I was walking into something I wouldn't easily walk out of. He showed me to a room on the second floor. Not lavish like the rest of the house, but still elegant in a way that made my chest tighten. There were fresh linens on the bed, a vase of white lilies on the dresser, and a window that looked out over the garden below. I could almost imagine Isabella standing there once, her reflection merging with mine. The same shape, the same face, the same ache in her eyes. This was hers, Dante said quietly from behind me, and my breath caught. I turned to look at him, and for the first time I saw something fragile in his expression, a fleeting trace of sorrow that softened the sharpness of his features. "You kept it the same," I said. "I don't change what isn't broken." "Isn't broken," I repeated, the words tasting bitter. "She's dead, Dante." His eyes flickered, not anger, not surprise, but something like regret. "That's not what broke her." I wanted to ask what he meant, but his tone made it clear the conversation was over before it began. He moved closer, his presence filling the space, his nearness making the air grow heavier. And though he didn't touch me, I felt the phantom weight of his hand against my skin, imagined what it might feel like if he did. "You can look for answers here," he said finally. "But understand this. Nothing in this house exists without my permission, not even your questions." The way he said it made me want to defy him, to push, to see how far his control went before it cracked. But another part of me, the one that had always understood danger instinctively, knew that testing him might mean playing with fire I wasn't ready to burn in. That night I couldn't sleep. The mansion was too quiet. The kind of quiet that makes every sound a warning. The creak of floorboards, the whisper of wind against glass, the faint hum of footsteps somewhere beyond the walls. I wandered through the corridor barefoot, following the dim light that spilled from the hallway sconces, until I found myself standing before a set of double doors slightly ajar. Curiosity tugged at me, that same reckless impulse that had led me here in the first place. And when I pushed the door open, I found myself in what could only be Dante's study. The room was lined with bookshelves, old volumes bound in leather, the air rich with the scent of tobacco and aged paper. On the desk, an unfinished glass of whiskey glowed amber in the half-light beside a stack of photographs and papers. I shouldn't have looked, but I did. The first photo was of Isabella, candid, unposed, her smile smaller, more cautious than the one in the pictures he'd framed around the apartment. The next was of her and Dante together, his arm around her, his eyes softer than I'd ever seen them. And then another. Isabella alone again, this time in the garden, staring at something beyond the camera, her expression unreadable. On the back, written in her handwriting, was a date, 2 weeks before her death. The door creaked behind me. I turned sharply, and there he was, framed in the doorway, his shirt open at the collar, his expression calm, but his eyes burning with something I couldn't name. "You have a habit of being where you shouldn't," he said quietly. "I could say the same for you," I replied, my pulse quickening, my voice steadier than I felt. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him with deliberate slowness. "You think you'll find her truth here," he murmured, moving closer. "But you don't understand. Her truth was built on lies." "Then tell me," I said, my voice rising despite myself. "Tell me who she was. Tell me what you did to her." He stopped in front of me, close enough that I could see the faint stubble along his jaw, the tension in his throat, the restrained fury, or longing, that lived just beneath his composure. "You think I killed her," he said. "I think you know who did." For a moment he didn't answer. Then slowly he reached out, his fingers brushing a strand of hair from my face, the touch so unexpected it stole my breath. "You really don't know what kind of world you've walked into, do you?" he whispered. "Then show me," I said. His hand fell away. His expression hardened again. "You want to see my world, Elena?" he said softly, almost like a promise. "Then tomorrow you'll learn what happens to those who break its rules." He turned and left, the door closing behind him with a quiet finality that felt more like a sentence than a warning. And as I stood there in the dim light, surrounded by the traces of my sister's life, and the man who had claimed it, I realized that whatever tomorrow brought, I had already broken every rule that mattered. Because the moment Dante Russo touched me, even just for a second, I stopped belonging to myself. And whether I wanted to or not, I was already his. Morning came in shades of gray and silver, a reluctant dawn that crept across the marble floors like a hesitant confession. And as I stood by the window of Isabella's old room, staring out at the mist that clung to the garden below, I couldn't tell if I had truly slept or simply drifted through the long hours like a ghost, half aware of my body, half lost inside the endless loop of his voice repeating in my mind. "Tomorrow, you'll learn what happens to those who break the rules." I told myself I wasn't afraid, that fear was a luxury for people who still believed they had choices. But deep down, I knew that what pulsed beneath my ribs wasn't fear exactly. It was anticipation, sharp, restless, uninvited. A hunger for something I couldn't yet name, something that frightened me more than any threat he could make. I should have hated him for the way he commanded me, for the power he wielded so effortlessly. But instead I found myself wondering what it would feel like to understand him, to see the world through his eyes, to know why a man like Dante Russo could love my sister and destroy her all in the same breath. A knock sounded at the door just after 8, and before I could answer, the handle turned and a woman entered, middle-aged, elegantly dressed, her hair pulled into a tight chignon that glistened like silver wire. She introduced herself as Lucia, the housekeeper, though something in her bearing suggested she was much more than that. Her eyes were sharp, her posture precise, and the way she studied me made it clear that she already knew who I was. "Mr. Russo asked that you join him for breakfast," she said, her voice smooth but edged, a tone that could cut if tested. "He's waiting in the conservatory." I hesitated only a moment before following her through the endless maze of hallways, their silence broken only by the faint echo of our footsteps. The conservatory was a glass room at the back of the mansion, flooded with pale light and filled with greenery, orchids, vines, and roses that climbed the walls as though trying to escape. Dante was there, standing by a table set for 2, his hands resting lightly on the back of a chair, his expression unreadable as he watched the rain slide down the windows. "Sit," he said, his voice quiet. And I did, though my heartbeat stuttered beneath my ribs. Lucia poured the coffee and left without a word. "You didn't sleep," he observed, his gaze flicking to the faint shadows under my eyes. "Neither did you." He smiled faintly, not a pleasant smile, but one that hinted at something sharper. "I don't sleep much, not since she died." There was a long silence between us, thick enough to choke on. I didn't know what to say, so I said nothing, letting the weight of the unspoken settle between us like dust. Then, without preamble, he reached into the pocket of his suit jacket and slid a small black envelope across the table toward me. "You wanted answers," he said. "Here's one." I opened it carefully, expecting photographs, letters, perhaps another piece of Isabella's secret life. But what I found was worse. Inside was a single sheet of paper. A report. My sister's death certificate. Official, stamped, and cold. But what made my stomach turn wasn't the cause of death. Blunt force trauma resulting from a fall, but the note at the bottom. Filed under observation pending confirmation. Private investigator involved. I looked up at him, confusion and anger warring in my voice. "What is this?" "That's the truth you think you want," he said, quietly, his eyes on mine. Someone was watching her before she died. Not me. Not my men. Someone else. He reached for his coffee, his fingers steady. But I could see it. The subtle tremor just beneath the surface, the kind only visible to someone who had already begun to learn the rhythm of his restraint. "She hired someone," he continued, "or someone hired one for her. I found out too late." "And you didn't tell the police?" His laugh was short, humorless, sharp. "The police?" He leaned forward, his voice dropping. "Elena, in my world, the police don't come unless they're already paid to look the other way." I stared at him, my pulse roaring in my ears. "Then what do you think happened to her?" He didn't answer at once. Instead, he turned his gaze to the rain, his jaw tight, his silence stretching until it became almost unbearable. "She was supposed to meet someone that night," he said finally. "She left the house without telling me. My men followed her as far as the bridge. After that, nothing. She fell, or she was pushed." "Pushed?" His eyes flicked back to me. "The man in the photograph, the one you found in the box. His name is Matteo Corsi. He used to work for me. He was my right hand once until he disappeared with a shipment worth a fortune and information that could ruin men far more dangerous than me. I think Isabella found him." "Found him?" "Or was meeting him." "That's what I intend to find out." The air between us crackled, heavy with tension, suspicion, and something else neither of us dared to name. I should have been angry. Should have accused him of hiding too much, of using me to clean up the mess my sister left behind. But instead I felt the strange, unnerving certainty that Dante wasn't lying. Not this time. His grief was too controlled. His guilt too heavy. The kind of burden only a man who had loved and lost could wear like armor. I studied him quietly for a long moment. "You think she was trying to help him?" "I think she was trying to protect me," he said, his voice soft but edged with something dangerous. "And it got her killed." For a heartbeat, the room seemed to tilt, the air too thick. The space between us collapsing until I could feel his sorrow bleeding into mine. Two people haunted by the same ghost, standing on opposite sides of her memory. I wanted to reach for him, to touch the wound I could see beneath his calm. But I didn't. I just whispered, "You still loved her." He looked at me then. Really looked, and something inside me broke a little under the weight of it. "Love doesn't die," he said. "It just changes shape, sometimes into guilt, sometimes into hate." I swallowed hard. "And what does it become when you see her again? In me?" For the briefest second, I saw it. The flicker of conflict behind his eyes. A flash of desire he tried to bury but couldn't. "I don't know yet," he said, finally, his voice almost a growl. "But it terrifies me." Before I could respond, the door opened and Marco stepped inside, his face pale, his expression grim. "Boss," he said, ignoring me completely. "We found something." Dante rose at once, his expression snapping back to control. "Where?" "The east gate. Blood. A lot of it." My breath caught. He glanced at me, his tone all command again. "Stay here." But of course I didn't. I followed him through the halls, my bare feet silent on the cold marble, until we reached the outer courtyard where 2 guards stood near the gate. The rain had stopped, but the ground was slick with mud and something darker, a crimson stain spreading across the stones. Dante crouched, his gloved hand brushing the ground. "It's fresh," he said. "Less than an hour." "Who?" Marco asked, too early to tell. But I saw it then, something half buried in the mud beside the gate. A small object glinting faintly under the gray light. I knelt and reached for it before anyone could stop me. A silver locket. I opened it with shaking hands. Inside was a photograph of 2 girls, me and Isabella, no older than 16, our faces pressed together, smiling at a world that hadn't yet broken us. Dante's voice was low, unreadable. "Where did she get this?" "I don't know," I whispered, my throat tight. "But someone wanted me to find it." He straightened, his expression darkening, his gaze flicking toward the trees beyond the gate. "Then whoever left it knows you're here." The words sent a chill through me that no amount of light could warm, and as we stood there, surrounded by rain and blood and memory, I realized with sudden, terrible clarity that the truth I was chasing wasn't buried in the past. It was alive, watching, waiting. And whatever had killed my sister had just found me. There are nights that stretch beyond time, nights that cling to your skin like smoke and never really end, nights that change the way your heart beats forever. And this was one of them, heavy with thunder that refused to break. The air thick and electric, as if the sky itself was holding its breath, waiting for something inevitable to happen. After the blood by the gate, after the discovery of the locket and Dante's quiet, controlled fury, the house had gone silent again, though the silence now felt different. Watchful, coiled, alive, as if every wall in that mansion was listening, waiting for one of us to speak the truth we both already knew, but neither dared to name. I spent the rest of the day in Isabella's old room, unable to shake the image of that blood staining the stones, the memory of Dante's gloved hands curling into fists, the low growl in his voice when he said someone knew I was here. I told myself it couldn't be connected to me, that I was just a bystander pulled into something older and darker. But the more I thought about it, the more I felt the edges of the lie closing in, like vines tightening around my throat. When night came, I didn't light the lamp. I sat in the dark by the window, watching the faint glow of the garden lights flicker through the mist. The roses swayed gently in the wind, black against the pale fog, and somewhere deep in the distance, I heard thunder rumble like a warning from a god I no longer believed in. I didn't hear the door open, but I felt it, the sudden shift in the air, the low hum of energy that only existed when he was near. Dante stepped inside without a word, the faint scent of smoke and rain trailing behind him. He didn't turn on the light either. For a moment, he just stood there in the dark, the shape of him outlined by the dim glow from the window, tall and still and unbearably present. "You've been quiet," he said finally, his voice soft but sharp, the kind of softness that cuts deeper than anger. "So have you." He moved closer, the shadows sliding over his face, revealing the hard line of his jaw, the tension in his eyes. I've had things on my mind. Like who left that locket? His mouth twitched, not a smile, not quite. Among other things. I turned away, unable to stand the weight of his gaze. Do you think it was him? Matteo? I think whoever it was wanted us to see it, he said, his tone calm but layered with something darker. And I think they wanted me to ask the question I've been avoiding since the moment I saw you. I felt my heart stumble. What question? He stepped closer, so close I could feel the heat of him against my back, his voice low enough to make my breath hitch. Who the hell are you really, Elena? I froze. He said my name like a curse, like a revelation, like he had been holding it on his tongue for days, testing its taste before finally speaking it aloud. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. My pulse thundered in my throat. You know who I am. I know who you pretend to be, he said, and now his voice was different, harder, colder, the mask slipping. You lied to me from the beginning. Slowly I turned to face him, the room spinning slightly as I met his eyes. Would you have let me stay if I told you the truth? He didn't answer, but the silence was enough. How long? I asked quietly. Since the day of the funeral, he said. When I saw you standing there, I knew something was wrong, but I didn't want to believe it. Not until Luca confirmed it this morning. Luca, I whispered, the name catching on my tongue. He followed me? He didn't deny it. Of course he hadn't. A man like Dante didn't leave things to chance. I laughed softly, bitter, breathless. So you knew all along. You let me walk into this house, into her room, into your world, just to see what I would do? He stepped closer, his expression unreadable. I wanted to see how much of her was in you. And what did you find? His jaw tightened. Too much. The words hit like a blade. I didn't know whether to be ashamed or defiant, so I did what I always did when cornered. I turned my fear into fury. You talk about her like she was a saint, but I've seen her letters, Dante. She was afraid of you. He flinched, barely, but enough that I saw it. Afraid of what I could do, not what I did, he said quietly. There's a difference. Is there? He took another step, closing the last bit of distance between us until I could feel the warmth of his breath on my face, his eyes dark and burning, his voice dropping to something that was almost a whisper. You think you understand what we were, but you don't. You see love as something gentle. It isn't. Not for people like us. People like us? I echoed, my voice trembling. He reached up, his hand hovering near my cheek but not touching. The ones who feel too much, who love until it destroys us. The words lodged in my throat, heavy and impossible. I hated how they made me feel, how they made me want to believe him. You don't know me, I said. No, he murmured, but I'm starting to. The tension between us snapped like a live wire. I should have stepped back, should have pushed him away, but instead I stood still, caught in the gravity of him, the air thick with everything we hadn't said. His eyes dropped to my lips for just a moment before he looked away sharply, as if furious with himself for even wanting what he saw. Why did you come here, Elena? He asked, his voice raw. Revenge? Guilt? To make me pay for what you think I did? I came for the truth, I said. Then you'll bleed for it, he said, his voice low, final. The words should have frightened me, but instead they felt like a promise. Terrible and intimate. He turned then, walking toward the door, but stopped with his hand on the handle. Luca wants you gone by morning, he said without looking at me. He thinks it's safer. I don't. I frowned. Why not? He looked back at me, his eyes colder now, distant, a wall rebuilding itself brick by brick. Because whoever left that locket doesn't want you dead yet. They want me to watch you disappear the way I watched her, and I don't intend to give them that satisfaction." For a long moment, neither of us moved. The only sound was the faint rumble of thunder outside and the pulse in my ears that refused to calm. Finally, I whispered, "So what happens now?" He studied me for a long time, his expression unreadable, then said, "Now, you stay. You do as I say. You stop pretending you're not part of this." "And if I don't?" He smiled, slow, dangerous, beautiful in a way that made my breath falter. "Then you'll learn what it means to disobey me." And with that, he was gone, the door closing behind him like a gunshot in the dark. I stood there for a long time, trembling, the echo of his words still burning through me. He knew. He knew everything now. And yet, instead of throwing me out, he had chosen to keep me, not as a guest, not even as an enemy, but as something else entirely, something I didn't yet understand but could already feel tightening around me like a leash made of silk and steel. I looked out at the garden again, at the black roses trembling in the wind, and realized that the truth I had come for was no longer the only thing binding me to this place. It was him. And whatever came next, I knew it would destroy one of us. Maybe both. Because love in his world wasn't salvation. It was the slowest kind of death. I didn't sleep that night, though sleep had become a stranger long before I ever set foot in Dante Russo's world, long before his voice began echoing through my mind like a secret I couldn't silence. I lay in the bed that once belonged to my sister, listening to the rain beating against the glass like impatient fingers, the sound merging with the rhythm of my heartbeat until I couldn't tell one from the other. And I thought about what it meant to be alive in a house built from ghosts, to breathe air that still carried the scent of the woman who came before me, my sister, my mirror, my undoing. I thought about the way he had said my name, the weight of it in his mouth, the fury beneath it, and how even anger sounded like desire when he spoke it. I thought about the locket, the blood, the truth that kept hiding behind the walls of his silence, and somewhere between the storm and the shadows, I realized that the line between seeking answers and becoming part of the story had already disappeared, and I was standing on the edge of something that felt like both a confession and a sin. When dawn came, it did so quietly, pale light leaking into the room like a reluctant witness. I dressed slowly, choosing one of the silk blouses Lucia had left folded in the wardrobe, a ghost of Isabella's perfume still clinging to it, as if her presence refused to let go. My hands shook slightly as I buttoned it. Not from fear, but from something more insidious. The feeling that I was no longer myself, that I was moving through a script my sister had written and left unfinished, and that somewhere Dante was still reading from the same page. I found him in the study, standing by the window again, a glass of whiskey in his hand, though it was barely 8 in the morning. The light touched his face in fragments. Sharp cheekbones, shadowed eyes, a mouth that looked carved for both cruelty and tenderness. He didn't turn when I entered. "You're early," he said, his tone flat, but I could hear the rough edge beneath it. "Couldn't sleep?" "I didn't try," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. He glanced over his shoulder, eyes lingering on me for a moment before turning back to the window. "You shouldn't be here." "You keep saying that," I said, crossing the room slowly, my footsteps almost soundless on the polished floor. "And yet you keep me here." His jaw tightened, his fingers curling slightly around the glass. "Because if you leave now, you'll die." "Or maybe you just don't want me to leave," I said quietly, and that made him turn. He faced me fully now, his eyes dark and unreadable, though I could feel the tension pulsing from him in waves. "You think this is a game?" "No," I said. "I think it's a confession waiting to happen." He set the glass down, the sound sharp in the silence. Then confess, Elena. Tell me what you're really doing here. The words hung between us like a blade, sharp and merciless. I could have lied again, could have told him I was still chasing my sister's ghost, still looking for someone to blame. But something inside me broke then. Something that had been holding me together since the moment I walked into her funeral, and before I could stop myself, the truth spilled out, unplanned and raw. I came here to destroy you. He didn't move, didn't even flinch, but I saw the flicker of something in his eyes. Surprise, maybe, or amusement, or both. Destroy me? He repeated softly, almost with disbelief. And how were you planning to do that? I didn't know, I said, the words trembling on my tongue. I thought I would find proof, something that would make you pay for what happened to her. I thought I would see the monster who killed my sister. But all I've seen is a man drowning in his own grief. The silence that followed was unbearable, heavy enough to make the air itself feel thick. He stared at me for a long moment, and then very quietly he asked, "And what do you see now?" I swallowed hard. "I don't know," I whispered. "That's what terrifies me." He took a slow step toward me, then another, his gaze locked on mine, his movements deliberate, like a predator closing in on prey that refused to run. "You came here to destroy me," he said again, his voice low, almost tender. "And now?" Now. The word felt dangerous, alive. "Now I think I'm the one being destroyed," I said. Something in him shifted then, some invisible boundary cracking open. His hand reached up, his fingers brushing against my chin, lifting it slightly until I was forced to meet his eyes. His touch was soft, almost reverent. But there was nothing gentle in the way he looked at me. Only hunger, restraint, and something deeper, older, that neither of us had the strength to name. "You shouldn't have come here," he murmured, though his thumb was tracing the line of my jaw as if memorizing it. "You should have stayed far away." "Maybe," I breathed, "but then you'd still be lying to yourself." He let out a low, humorless laugh, the sound vibrating through the space between us. "You think you know me?" "No," I said. "But I know what it looks like when a man loves something he can't have." For a heartbeat, everything stopped. Then he kissed me. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't meant to be. It was anger and grief and memory colliding, all the things we'd tried to bury clawing their way to the surface. His hands framed my face, his mouth claiming mine like a man trying to erase a ghost. And I should have pushed him away. Should have remembered why I was here. But instead I let myself fall into it. Into him. Into the ache that had been building since the moment his eyes found me at that funeral. When he finally pulled back, his breath was unsteady, his forehead resting against mine. "You're not her," he whispered, as if trying to convince himself. "I know," I said, my voice shaking. "But you keep looking at me like I am." He stepped back suddenly, his chest rising and falling as if the air itself burned him. "You have no idea what you've done." "Then tell me," I said, my voice breaking. "Tell me the truth, Dante. All of it." He turned away, his hand dragging through his hair, his control slipping in small, jagged pieces. "You want the truth? Fine. I loved your sister, but she wasn't what you think she was. She lied to me. She betrayed me. She was pregnant when she died, and the child wasn't mine." The words hit like a gunshot. I stumbled back, my breath catching in my throat, the floor tilting beneath me. "What?" He turned to face me again, his eyes dark with a pain I couldn't begin to understand. "She was meeting Matteo the night she died. I think he killed her. And now whoever he worked for is using you to finish what he started." "That's not possible," I said. But even as the words left my mouth, they felt hollow. The locket, the blood, the photograph. It all fit too perfectly. He stepped closer again, his voice softer now, though no less dangerous. You think I'm your enemy, Elena, but the truth is, you're standing in the middle of a war that started long before you arrived. And now that you're here, you don't get to walk away. I stared at him, trembling, every part of me unraveling. What do you want from me? He looked at me then. Really looked. And something in his expression broke, something raw and unguarded. I don't know, he said, his voice low, but I can't let you go. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The storm outside had quieted, but inside, everything still felt electric, suspended, dangerous. Finally, I whispered, Then what happens now? He smiled faintly, not kind, not cruel, just tired. Now you stop running from the truth, and I stop pretending I don't need you to find it. He reached out again, his fingers brushing my wrist, his touch light but burning, and I felt the world narrow down to the space between us, to the fragile thread that tied grief to desire, pain to love, life to death. And in that moment, I knew I was no longer chasing my sister's story. I was living mine. And Dante Russo was both, the beginning and the end of it. There is a strange calm that comes after the truth, a silence that feels less like peace and more like the breath you take just before the plunge, the one that fills your lungs with enough air to drown slowly, beautifully, completely. And that was how it felt the morning after Dante's confession, as if something sacred had been broken between us, but neither of us could bring ourselves to gather the pieces. The air inside the mansion was different now, charged with a new kind of tension, no longer the quiet war of suspicion, but something sharper, shared, a fragile alliance forged in blood and loss, bound by the ghost of the same woman who had destroyed us both in different ways. When I found him in the study, the sunlight was spilling through the tall windows in fractured gold, cutting across the floor like bars of light in a cage, and Dante stood at the center of it, his silhouette carved from shadow. His back turned to me as he spoke softly into his phone in Italian, the words rolling low and deliberate, a language that sounded more like a command than a conversation. I didn't understand every word, but I caught enough. The tone, the clipped phrases, the names whispered like threats, to know he was calling men who only existed in the kind of world where loyalty was measured in bullets and graves. When he hung up, he didn't look at me at first. You shouldn't be here, he said, his voice quiet but with an edge that told me it wasn't about safety this time. It was about control, the illusion of it, the need to maintain it even as everything beneath him crumbled. You keep saying that, I replied softly, but we both know I'm not leaving. He turned then, his eyes finding mine, dark and fathomless, carrying the weight of something ancient. No, he said, you're not. There was no tenderness in his tone, only acceptance, the grim understanding that whatever was coming next, we were already in it together. He crossed the room, placing a folder on the table between us. Matteo Corsi, he said. He's been in hiding for almost a year. My men tracked a money trail through Zurich, then Naples. He's alive. My heart clenched. And you think he killed her? I think he betrayed me, Dante said. And I think she got caught between us. I stared at the folder, at the name that had already become a shadow in my mind. Then we find him. He studied me for a long moment, as if trying to decide whether I meant it, whether I understood what I was offering. And maybe I didn't. Not yet. But the fire in my chest was real, and it burned with something bigger than fear. He poured 2 glasses of whiskey, handed me one, his fingers brushing mine. If we do this, he said, there's no going back. I met his gaze. There's nothing to go back to. He nodded once, slow, deliberate. Then we start tonight. The hours that followed blurred into motion. Phone calls, coded messages, The quiet arrival of men I didn't recognize, all dressed in black, moving through the house like shadows trained to obey without question. I watched them from the edge of the room, wondering what kind of man commanded this kind of loyalty. Wondering if my sister had seen the same faces and realized too late that she was standing among wolves. Lucia appeared at some point, her expression unreadable, and pressed a key into my hand. "You'll need this," she said. "It's for the cellar. If he doesn't tell you to stay out, it means he wants you to see what's down there." Her words lingered long after she left, echoing in my mind like a warning wrapped in permission. When Dante came to find me later, the sky outside had turned to ash, twilight pressing against the windows like the breath of something waiting to enter. He was dressed in black, the same color that seemed to live in his veins, and when he looked at me, I felt the familiar pull, that dangerous gravity that made the space between us feel like a confession. "Come," he said, his voice low. "There's something you need to see." He led me through the mansion, down a staircase I hadn't noticed before, narrow and steep, the air growing colder with every step until we reached the cellar. The space was vast and silent, lined with shelves of files and boxes, each labeled with names I didn't recognize. But what caught my eye wasn't the records. It was the wall covered in photographs. Isabella's face stared back at me from dozens of them, captured from different angles, some from far away, as if taken by someone following her. The dates were recent, some only weeks before her death. "Who took these?" I whispered. "Matteo," Dante said. "Or someone working for him. He was tracking her movements long before I realized he was back in New York." I stepped closer, my fingers trembling as I touched the edge of one photo. Isabella sitting in a cafe, her eyes downcast, her smile forced. There was another, of her entering a car, and another of her walking along the river at night. The last one made my heart stop. It was the night she died. She was standing on the bridge, her face turned slightly away, her hair blowing in the wind. And though the image was grainy, I could see her mouth open, as if speaking, maybe calling someone's name. And next to her, half hidden by shadow, a man's silhouette. "Matteo," Dante said quietly. "Are you sure?" I asked, my voice breaking. He hesitated, then said, "Yes." I turned to him, my throat tight. "Then why haven't you killed him?" He looked at me, his expression unreadable. "Because I'm not sure I want to." The words struck like a blow. "You're protecting him?" "No," he said softly. "I'm protecting what she might have loved." I stared at him, feeling the air between us change again, thickening with something that wasn't quite anger or sorrow, but both, fused together in a way that felt like pain. "You still love her," I said, not accusing, just understanding. He didn't deny it. "And now you wear her face." The silence that followed was unbearable. I wanted to scream, to break the mirror of her memory that stood between us, but instead I stepped forward until I could feel the heat of his body against mine. "Then stop seeing her when you look at me," I whispered. "See me." He closed his eyes for a moment, as if the words hurt him more than any wound ever could. "That's the problem," he said, opening them again, his voice rough. "I do." Before I could speak, his mouth was on mine again, desperate and unrestrained, and this time I didn't stop him. The cellar disappeared. The ghosts, the photographs, the past. Everything burned away until there was only the sound of his breath and the taste of whiskey and rain and sin. It wasn't love, not yet, maybe not ever. It was something older, something that came from loss and loneliness and recognition, and I met it with the same hunger that had been devouring me from the moment I saw him. When we finally broke apart, he rested his forehead against mine, his breath ragged. "This is wrong," he murmured. "I know," I whispered, "but it feels inevitable." He let out a sound that was half a laugh, half a sigh. "You're going to ruin me." Maybe that's the point. For a long time, we stood there, surrounded by the evidence of everything that had led us here. Two people tangled in the wreckage of someone else's story. But as the hours passed and the storm outside began to rise again, I saw it in his eyes. The shift, the decision forming like thunder in the distance. When he finally spoke, his voice was steel. "Tomorrow we move. Naples first. That's where Matteo was last seen. You'll stay close to me. No one else. Understood?" I nodded. He brushed his thumb against my lower lip, his touch soft, almost tender, and for a fleeting second I thought he might kiss me again. But instead he turned away. "Get some rest," he said. "Tomorrow we start a war." As he left, I looked once more at my sister's face on the wall, her eyes forever fixed on something just out of reach, and I realized that whatever truth we found in Naples, it wouldn't bring her peace. It would only bury us both deeper in the world that killed her. But I no longer cared. Because Dante Russo's war had become mine. And if blood was the language of his world, then I was ready to speak it. There are moments when you can feel the world tilting beneath your feet. Moments when time folds in on itself, and everything you thought you understood begins to dissolve into something darker, heavier, irreversible. And that was what it felt like as we drove through the rain-soaked streets of Naples. The city glistening like a fever dream beneath the headlights. Every shadow holding the shape of a ghost I couldn't name. I sat beside Dante in the back of the black car, his presence as steady and consuming as the hum of the engine, his hand resting loosely against his knee, his expression carved in silence, the kind of silence that feels like a confession waiting for the right moment to break. I had thought I understood what it meant to chase the truth, to hunt for it the way a starving thing hunts for blood, but I hadn't understood the cost. Not until that night. Not until I saw the way Dante looked at me when he thought I wasn't watching, as if he couldn't decide whether I was his salvation or the last mistake he would ever make. The road blurred past us, a slick ribbon of wet asphalt, the city lights smearing against the windows like bruises of color, and I couldn't stop thinking about my sister, about the version of her who must have sat like this once, her hands trembling in her lap, her eyes searching for safety in the same man who now sat beside me. Dante hadn't said much since we left New York. He had spent the flight in silence, reading files, making calls, his mind already building strategies I couldn't see. But I could feel his tension, his need for control fighting against the chaos that seemed to follow us like a shadow. And maybe that was why I stayed quiet too. Because I understood it now. That desperate need to hold something steady when everything else is crumbling. When we arrived at the safe house, an old villa at the edge of the city, its walls scarred by salt and time, the rain had turned to mist, clinging to the stone like a veil. Dante's men were already there, waiting. Luca nodded as we entered, his eyes flicking toward me with the same unease I had seen since the beginning, as if he wasn't sure whether I was the weapon or the wound. Inside, the air smelled of dust and smoke, the remnants of another life long gone. Dante moved through the space like he had been here before, his every motion precise, deliberate, dangerous. "He's here," Luca said quietly. "Matteo. We traced him to the docks. But he's not alone." Dante's gaze sharpened, his jaw tightening. "Who's with him?" "Men from the De Luca family," Luca replied. 5, maybe 6. They're guarding him." For a long moment, Dante said nothing. Then he turned to me, his eyes dark as the sea outside. "You stay here," he said. I shook my head before he even finished. "No." "Elena, I'm not staying behind," I interrupted, my voice trembling but firm. "She died alone. I won't." He stepped closer, his hand catching my wrist, his grip firm but not cruel, his breath warm against my skin. "If anything happens to you..." Then maybe you'll finally understand what it felt like to lose her, I said, the words spilling out before I could stop them. And for a heartbeat, his face went still, his expression cracking open into something raw and almost human. He released me slowly, his fingers brushing mine as he let go. Then stay close, he said finally. Don't speak unless I tell you to. The drive to the docks was short but endless, the sound of the tires against the wet pavement a steady heartbeat in the dark. I watched the city fade into ruin, narrow streets, flickering lights, the smell of the sea thick in the air. And when we finally stopped, I could hear it. The faint rhythm of waves breaking against the pier, the metallic creak of boats shifting in the tide. Dante got out first, moving like a shadow, his men following silently. I stayed close behind, the mist clinging to my hair, my clothes, my thoughts. The warehouse loomed ahead, its windows blacked out, its doors rusted but not closed. Inside, I could hear voices, low, rough, muffled by the hum of rain. Dante glanced back at me once, his hand motioning for silence. Then he pushed the door open. The smell hit first. Salt, oil, blood. The men inside turned, startled, and everything happened too quickly for thought. Gunfire erupted, flashes of light cutting through the dark, the sound so loud it swallowed everything. I ducked instinctively, the world spinning around me. And when it stopped, when the echoes finally faded, Dante was standing in the center of the chaos, his gun still raised, his breathing steady. Matteo was on the floor. He was younger than I expected, his face bruised, his eyes wild and pleading. When he saw Dante, he laughed, a broken, manic sound that echoed through the empty space. "You shouldn't have come," he said. "You brought her with you." Dante's expression didn't change. "You killed her." Matteo shook his head, his smile widening. "No," he whispered. "I tried to save her." The words hung there, suspended between them like smoke. I stepped forward before I realized what I was doing. "Save her?" I said. "From what?" Matteo's gaze snapped to me, and for a second I saw recognition. Not confusion, not surprise, but recognition. "You," he said, his voice trembling. "You shouldn't be alive." Dante moved instantly, grabbing him by the collar, slamming him against the wall. "What the hell does that mean?" Matteo coughed, blood staining his lips, but he was laughing again, the sound wet and terrible. "He never told you," he said, his eyes darting between us. "She found out. She knew. That's why she ran." "Knew what?" Dante growled. Matteo's gaze found mine again, and something in his expression shifted. Pity, maybe. "About her sister," he said softly. "About you." My breath caught. "What are you talking about?" "She knew you were in danger," he whispered, "that he wouldn't let you go if he found out you existed." The world seemed to tilt, the floor falling away beneath me. "You're lying." But he wasn't. Dante's grip loosened slightly, confusion flickering across his face. "She never told me she had a sister." "She wanted to protect her," Matteo said. "From you." The words hit like a blow, shattering something I didn't even realize I'd been holding together. I looked at Dante, but he wasn't looking at me. He was staring past me, at some memory, some ghost of the woman he thought he loved, and I could see it. The doubt beginning to fracture his certainty. In that moment, Matteo moved. It happened too fast. A flash of metal, a cry, the crack of a gunshot. I didn't see who pulled the trigger first, only the aftermath. Matteo collapsing, blood spreading like ink across the concrete, Dante standing over him, the gun still smoking in his hand. For a long time, no one spoke. Then Dante turned to me, his eyes empty, his voice hollow. "He was lying," he said. "He had to be lying." But even he didn't sound convinced. I wanted to believe him, wanted to tell myself this was just another manipulation, another trap set by men who traded in death and deceit. But somewhere deep inside, Beneath the layers of rage and grief and denial, something cracked open. A terrible, impossible thought that took root and began to grow. What if Isabella hadn't been afraid of Dante because of what he'd done to her, but because of what she knew he would do to me? The sound of sirens rose faintly in the distance, blue light flickering across the wet floor. Luca's voice was sharp, urgent. "We have to go." Dante didn't move. He just stood there, staring at the body, his expression unreadable. I reached for him, my hand trembling. "Dante?" He turned to me slowly, his eyes haunted, his voice breaking on my name. "If it's true," he said, "if she was trying to protect you from me." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Because in that instant I understood what he couldn't bring himself to say. If Isabella had died because of me, then everything I had done, every lie, every confession, every kiss, had been the cruelest kind of sin. And as the sirens grew louder and the night closed in around us, I knew that whatever truth waited in the final chapter of this story would not save either of us. It would destroy us both. There are endings that feel like silence, soft and merciful, the kind that come with dawn and forgiveness. But there are others that arrive like thunder, loud and merciless, shaking the ground beneath your feet, tearing the sky open, demanding to be felt. And I should have known ours would be the latter, because there was never anything quiet about the way Dante Russo and I collided, never anything soft about the way our souls recognized each other in ruin. We left Naples before the police arrived, the night swallowing the car as it tore through the narrow streets, headlights cutting through fog and fear. The city faded behind us, its ghosts left whispering in the dark, and I sat beside him in silence, my hands trembling in my lap, my thoughts unraveling like a spool of thread that had finally come undone. He didn't speak. Not once. His face was carved in shadow, his eyes fixed ahead, the lines of grief and rage etched so deep that I knew no amount of time would ever smooth them away. The gun lay on the seat between us, gleaming faintly in the light of the passing street lamps, the scent of gunpowder still clinging to his skin. I wanted to tell him it wasn't his fault. I wanted to believe it myself. But the words felt hollow. Fragile things that could not survive in the heavy air between us. Matteo was dead. Isabella's truth was still a ghost that refused to rest. And somewhere, beneath all the chaos and blood, I had begun to wonder if I had been chasing my sister's story or my own destruction. We drove until dawn, until the sky began to pale and the horizon opened before us like an old wound. Dante pulled the car onto a dirt road that led to a cliff overlooking the sea. The same sea my sister had died beside. The same endless stretch of water that now looked as if it could swallow every sin the world had ever known. He killed the engine, and for a long time, neither of us moved. The only sound was the wind and the waves breaking against the rocks below. "She knew," he said finally, his voice barely more than a breath. I turned to him, my chest tightening. Knew what? He didn't look at me. About what I was, about what I'd done, about what loving me would cost her. There was something in his tone that made me ache. Not just sorrow, but acceptance. The kind of quiet surrender that comes when a man realizes he's already been judged and found guilty by the only person whose forgiveness ever mattered. "She wasn't protecting herself," he continued. "She was protecting you. She made a deal with Matteo. She gave him information, money, a way out, in exchange for your safety. He must have betrayed her. Maybe he thought she'd run to me." The words sank into me like knives, each one carving a deeper truth. My sister hadn't just died because of love. She'd died because of me. Because of blood. Because of the past I'd never even known I carried. "I didn't know," I whispered, my voice breaking. "I didn't know she was trying to save me." Dante's eyes finally met mine, dark and hollow, the sea reflected in their depths. "Neither did I." Not until tonight." For a moment, we just stared at each other. Two people caught in the wreckage of choices neither of us had made, but both of us had to live with. And then, slowly, he reached into his coat and pulled out the locket. The same one we had found by the gate. The one that had started everything. He turned it over in his hand before opening it, revealing the small photograph inside. Two girls frozen in sunlight, smiling as if the world was still kind. "She loved you more than anything," he said softly. "She told me once that you were her heart, and that if anything ever happened to her, I'd have to protect you. I thought it was just words. I didn't realize it was a promise." I took the locket from his hand, my fingers brushing his, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. The photograph was faded now, the edges worn, but it felt alive, pulsing with memory and loss. "Then why didn't you?" I asked quietly. He flinched, just slightly, but enough. "Because I didn't deserve to." The wind howled through the cliffs, the sea below roaring louder, and I thought about how strange it was that love and destruction could live in the same breath. That the same man who had shattered me could also be the only one who had ever truly seen me. "You don't get to decide that," I said finally. He smiled faintly, bitterly. "Don't I?" The silence stretched, heavy and fragile, until it finally broke with my voice. Low, shaking, but certain. "You can't keep living like this, hating yourself for loving her, hating yourself for surviving." "And what about you?" he asked. "Can you forgive yourself for loving the man who destroyed her?" The question hit harder than any confession could have. I wanted to say yes. I wanted to say no. Instead, I said nothing, because the truth was too complicated to name, too tangled in the ache between us. He looked at me then, really looked, and I saw it. The shift. The flicker of something that wasn't hope, but something close enough to hurt. He reached for my face, his hand trembling slightly, his thumb brushing away a tear I hadn't realized had fallen. "She would have hated this," I whispered. "I know," he said. And then, because words were useless, because grief and love had become the same language, he kissed me. It wasn't gentle. It was desperate, bruised, broken. A kiss that tasted of salt and loss and everything we couldn't change. It was a kiss that said goodbye before either of us had the courage to speak it. When he pulled away, the world felt quieter, emptier, as if something sacred had burned out between us. "What happens now?" I asked, my voice barely audible. He looked out at the sea again, his expression distant. "Now I finish what she started," he said. "I end the people who did this, and then I disappear." "You can't," I said, panic rising. "You don't get to walk away like that." He turned to me, and for a moment the mask slipped, and I saw the man beneath, not the boss, not the sinner, just a man who had lost too much and loved too hard. "I already have," he said. The wind rose again, cold and relentless, whipping through my hair, carrying the taste of salt and rain. I reached for him, but he was already stepping back, his eyes soft and final. "Go home, Elena," he said. "Don't make my mistakes. Don't let the ghosts win." And then he was gone. He walked toward the edge of the cliff, his silhouette framed against the pale dawn, the sea below roaring like a heartbeat. And though he didn't look back, I knew he felt me watching. He stood there for a moment, tall, unbroken, impossibly alone, before the fog swallowed him, and I never saw him again. They said later that his body was never found, that the tide took him, that men like him never really die. They just vanish into the stories they leave behind. Maybe that's true. Maybe some loves are too violent for the world to hold. Weeks later, I stood in that same place, the locket warm in my hand, the sea below endless and alive. I had buried my sister's memory beside the water, not with flowers or prayers, but with the truth, the only kind of offering that mattered. I whispered her name into the wind, and for the first time I felt her not as a ghost, but as a part of me, the part that had survived. Dante had once told me that love doesn't die, it just changes shape. I think he was right. It becomes grief. It becomes forgiveness. It becomes the silence you live with long after the gunfire fades. As the sun broke through the clouds, I closed my eyes and let the light touch my face. I thought of him, of her, of everything we had lost and everything we had found in that loss. And for the first time, I didn't feel broken, just awake, alive, free.